Welcome. I'm Leslie Canham.
I'm Mary Gavoni.
I'm Linda Harvey.
I'm Olivia Wan, and together we are the Compliance Divas.
Welcome to the Compliance Divas podcast. This is Leslie Canham, and I'll be your moderator for this very special podcast that we have today. At the Compliance Divas, we bring clarity and simplicity to compliance by navigating regulatory compliance to keep you on course. You can subscribe to the Compliance Divas podcast through your favorite podcast app, or you can go to our website, thecompliancedivas.com. Resources that we mentioned during our podcast today can be found on the compliancedivas.com website. Resources that we mentioned during our podcast can be found in the show notes. And we'd love it if you would send questions to us at support@thecompliancedivas.com. So let's get right down to our very interesting podcast today. Back in July of 2020, there was an EPA final rule that applies to all dental offices with very few exceptions. It is a rule that required dental offices to have an amalgam separator if they place or remove amalgams. This created a little bit of a hardship for folks that didn't have it, or folks that said, well, we don't place very many amalgams, or in fact, we've done away with amalgam altogether. Why do we need to do this? Well, it's an EPA final rule, and we have a very special guest, Charles McCary, who is going to tell us all about why we need to capture amalgam and make sure that it doesn't put us in a position of being non-compliant. Here at the Compliance Divas, we want to make sure that our clients are safe, that patients are safe, and that they're compliant. So when it comes to amalgam waste, are you compliant? Welcome, Charles. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I'd like you to just give us a little bit of information about yourself. We've known you for many years at the Compliance Divas through various different dental meetings, and particularly our beloved Association for Dental Safety, formerly known as OSAP. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I love talking about our product. So as I mentioned before, I've been in the business for like 40 years of dental. So I was involved with managing a region for an independent company. And I noticed some things when I'd send a service tech out. Many times they'd come back and I'd say, oh, what was the problem? They said, well, the amalgam separator was clogged up. Then it shut their suction down. And I said, oh, really? Yeah, okay. Well, glad we took care of that. But maybe we should start checking these amalgam separators, which have, by the way, they've been around for more than 2020. It's about a 30-year technology. So what a lot of people don't understand is an amalgam separator captures everything solid that comes through the dental vacuum system, not just amalgam. So they mostly fill up with prophy paste. So as you might understand, if you have 2 or 3 hygienists, they're going to fill up pretty quickly. And we noticed that because we sell prophy paste too. When I was involved with that, and an office would buy 5 or 6 boxes of New Pro, a month. So that's being captured somewhere. And anyway, what we found is, I said, why don't you start checking these amalgam separators for our clients? And they said, okay. So what they would say is, you know what? 90% of them are already overfilled. And we noticed another thing. There's a bucket in the equipment room that you're supposed to put chairside traps in. There's never any traps in them. So where's that amalgam? So the EPA did their own research, and they claim, which I would think everybody would believe, that 70% of the amalgam is captured in a chairside trap. And so what do they do with it? Some offices rinse it out in the sink and reuse it. Some throw it into the regular trash. And then even worse, someone say, oh yeah, I'll throw it in a biohazard container. So that either goes to the landfill or is incinerated. So that's where I thought to myself, there's got to be another way. There's got to be a better way. And so what we've developed is a way where it's captured at the source, which is called point of source technology. And I learned this from actually the water authority people in my hometown. They said, we always prefer capturing at the point of source, any kind of toxic material. So I know I rambled on there. Does that answer your question?
It sure does. And, the point that you make about overfilled amalgam separators, I conduct a lot of on-site training and in office audits and inspections for compliance. And you're right that the amalgam separators are overfilled. I don't think that they realize that because it's just like you said, it's not point of use. It's out of sight, out of mind. And I have asked many times team members, what are you doing with those chair side traps? And you were exactly right. They were either rinsing them and reusing them to, I guess, be economical or frugal, or they were throwing them in the trash, and they're not knowing that they're in violation and could get cited for this. And it's harmful for the environment as well. Mary, you had some questions. Would you just go ahead and take over the microphone and fire away?
Absolutely. Again, Charles, welcome and thank you for joining us. And I think you may have started to answer my questions already. I love your story about why you came up with this technology because of the efficiency and the need to capture the amalgam at the source. I see, just like Leslie shared and you shared, all kinds of practices that are just tossing the traps out in the trash or putting them in the sharps container with the biohazard waste, which is the worst thing they can do, or rinsing the scrap down the sink. And the job that everybody hates the most is, of course, having to change the filter or the cartridge in the amalgam separator. They'll put it off
Oh, yeah.
forever because they don't want to touch it. And
Right.
there are some states, I know I'm originally from Michigan, and in Michigan, they require a weekly monitoring of the
That's
amalgam
right.
separator. They've had an amalgam separator rule in place since 2013. So some of those people now are coming up on their grandfather date that they're going to have to replace their separator or use something
Right.
else that keeps them in compliance. And I'm sure they're not the only ones. I think Vermont was one of the first states that required amalgam separators, if I remember correctly. So the biggest question we have, and I know that you can reassure us on this, is Captol approved by the EPA to be in compliance with that Clean Water Act?
Yes, it is. I actually went to Washington several years ago and met with the EPA, and I've sort of educated them on the technology that is available because they're not in dentistry. They know that you're supposed to brush and floss, but that's about all they know about dentistry. So, and they were great. And I want to say one thing, if an office uses amalgam separators properly, they work. But you're right. It's even on the IFUs say to check it weekly, right? And then you're supposed to see there's a fill line. It's about halfway up that cartridge. And of course, they have to get a flashlight and shine it through the backside so you can see it because it's pretty cloudy. But I want to say that if they have an amalgam separator and they follow the instructions of use and they recycle the chairside traps when they should, probably weekly, at least weekly, that it worked great. So what the EPA did is we're called an equivalent device. So we have to meet the standards and we are tested with the same material that original amalgam separators or traditional amalgam separators are tested with. It's this material we have to buy from Germany that has the proper, particle distribution. And it's quite expensive, but we have to get that and run these tests, and you have to capture over 95%. And we're at like 98.7%. But keep in mind, it's captured at the source because it's only per patient. Only when when you're involved in amalgam, do you use our product, which is easy to know. You either look in the chart or you look in the mouth and you say, okay, I need a Captol tip. So another thing that we've prevented, and we've done independent studies to prove this, is that completely eliminates dissolved mercury. Because as the amalgam sits in chairside traps over the years, it's dissolved. I mean, when I say over the years, sometimes they're chairside traps are years old before they're changed. But they usually don't change them till their suction starts dropping. And they say something's wrong here. We've gone out many times when they said we lost suction, and we have to change the chairside traps. So y'all all know this, right? So, offices say don't use any bleach when you're cleaning the vacuum lines, which is a good policy, right? Anything acidic. But what does a dentist use every day? Phosphoric acid, acetones, even the clean water, the water disinfectants are acidic. A lot of them are citric acid. So there's chemicals going through the vacuum lines all day long, every day. And it's dissolving that amalgam, and it's dissolving, leaching out the mercury that's in the amalgam sitting in the chairside traps and in the vacuum lines. And sometimes even in the amalgam separators, if they're not changed.
So even though we may think we're doing this really good job of using the amalgam separators, we're not completely protecting the environment unless we're using this kind of a device. And
Right.
It is just to clarify, because I'm sure that there will be people out there that think that they can get more than one patient use out of a Captol device, that it is one patient use and
Right.
you use it when you are removing amalgam. And I also like the feature that it also has a backflow prevention device on it.
Right,
So
it does.
help cross contamination.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because when it's in a Captol tip, it's encapsulated. And from what I think an OSHA standpoint is, you don't expose the assistants, because they're usually the one that changes the chairside traps, right? And they're usually the one that has to go back there and change that filter, unless they call a service company, which a lot of them do, which is a big expense. But they're exposing themselves to this mercury that y'all are scientists, and that, it's elemental mercury is not that dangerous. I'm not ever saying mercury in your mouth is dangerous. You should remove it. But when it's removed into the environment, it changes. It changes from elemental to methyl mercury. And that's what you find in fish. And so if unbeknownst to an assistant, she doesn't use eye protection, she's changing chairside traps, they stick, usually they have to pull on them with some pliers, and then it plops out and it could get in their eyes. It could get, they could be exposed to it. I don't know if that's a legitimate concern, but I think it is.
Absolutely, it is. I can guarantee you that there will be a number of assistants who are in charge of changing those traps or changing the filter on the amalgam separator that have not been trained, do not understand, don't read the IFUs to know what kind of PPE they should be wearing. They may wear gloves when they're removing the suction traps, but probably not respiratory protection, probably not eye protection. So that's
Right.
a great point that you make, Charles, and thank you for bringing that up.
Okay.
Olivia, you had a question for Charles.
Yeah, first of all, Charles, we appreciate always seeing you at the conferences and
Yeah.
getting our
Same here.
education updated with the information you bring to the table. And I agree with you that these amalgam separators are effective. They work. But what
Right.
we've seen is when we go on site, 9 times out of 10, we're taking photographs of the amalgam separator showing that it's exceeded the fill line. Now, one of the things that Linda Harvey and I had been talking about was the plastic. What about with the Captol device? What is your suggestion, or what happens to the plastic for especially our practices that are adhering to an environmentally friendly environment?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up, because one thing, the carbon footprint with Captol is a lot less too, because we're only shipping amalgam, the material we're trying to capture, right? Where a lot of the other companies are shipping amalgam, water, prophy paste, and everything else. That's one point. There's a lot of plastic involved in that. There's a lot of extra shipping costs because of weight. But when we get those capped off tips, we have a container that holds 75 tips, which is about 6 months supply for most dentists who don't place amalgams and just remove them. When we get them back, we have a system that cracks them open and gets the filter part out. That has like a 3 micron filter. Human hair is 100 microns thick. So that's how far down we capture. So we take that filter, we throw it into another container, and we take the plastic and send it back to our injection molding company to have it reused. So nothing ever goes to the landfill. And we take the contaminated inner filters to a recycling center that's like, fortuitously, it's only like 60 miles up the road from us. That's the same McCary recycling center that all the amalgam separator companies use, or most of them use. So we've made a commitment to not have any plastic go to the landfills. And I know that's a big concern these days, is microplastics.
Thanks for clearing that up and helping us understand the process after it's utilized. So that's great to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Charles, it is so interesting to me how you break this down to these small, I guess you could say, components of suction that we never think about. We think about keeping a clear field in the patient's mouth. That's a dental assistant's job, is to make sure the dentist can perform their job well. And when you're using this suction, you don't think about the various different chemicals that go through the citric acid that you mentioned that breaks down, and you don't think about how it affects what's in the amalgam separator or other materials that have been used that during dental procedures. So we appreciate you bringing that to our attention. I am, again, really excited about the fact that this is an equivalent device to an amalgam separator. It's certainly going to help dental practices be able to continue on with their productivity without having to have those emergency situations of an amalgam separator getting clogged up. And I especially love that you said it's 98.7% is what is being captured right there at chairside, right at point of use. And I think I was maybe under the impression in the past that every time you see a patient, you would be putting your cap doll on. But from what I learned today, you only use the cap doll when you know you're going to be facing an amalgam, that you're prepping a tooth, maybe an existing amalgam, or you're placing an amalgam. So you don't need it for every patient. You could use your regular high velocity evacuator. And your earth-friendly position of preserving the environment is so important to so many people today. So we're making sure that we're getting that mercury from being, I guess you could say, put back into the environment, like with the sharps containers. When they go to incinerate that's just bringing that mercury right back to us. With the world, we need to protect our earth. And I think that's at the heart of many people today, is that let's try to have less waste, less plastic, and do things where we're going to be more earth friendly. I'm so excited about this. I want to find out, is there a way that someone could just try a Capdol device without having to commit to buying a whole box of it?
Yes, we work that out. I mean, when we're at trade shows and such, we hand them out like candy. It's like, but like I said again, they should have some type of way, if they use it in the patient's mouth. A lot of them, a lot of dentists, they just want to make sure it's got good suction, and they'll just put it on and slurp up, water out of a cup to see how well it suctions, which to help them understand that you don't lose much suction, hardly any. We've had a few cases where the doctors, their vacuum is so poor that they notice a difference, but very, very infrequently does that happen. And we always we send them a little gauge that they can check their vacuum without the Capdol, so they'll know, now it's probably time for another suction pump in this office. But And also, when we're talking about the equivalent device, I want to make it clear too that there are some municipalities that have different requirements than what the EPA has. We follow what the EPA recommends or what EPA has established as far as our modality. But there are some municipalities that have stricter, like in New York, which we're working on that. They want 99%. The EPA says you got to get over 95%. So our argument always is with, we're getting over 95%. We're not getting 99 yet, but we're getting all the amalgam instead of the 35% that finally makes it to the amalgam, to the equipment room. So that's our argument. But that's over 90% of states and municipalities are just follow the EPA's guidelines.
Mary, give us your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you for bringing that last point up, Charles, because it's, of course, always the responsibility of the practice owner to make sure that they're compliant with not only federal rules, but any local or state rules. And I think, again, I'll use Michigan as an example because their amalgam separator rule is actually written in the Board of Dentistry rules. So they need to make sure that if they want to use Captol, that it would be considered by those rules as an equivalent device. So
yes,
we
absolutely.
always have to follow whatever the local rules are, but most states do follow the federal EPA rules.
Right.
So,
and it's real simple. Every dentist is supposed to fill out a one-time compliance report. And one state told us that maybe 10% of the dentists do that. If they're not sure, all they have to do is go to their environmental authorities that has to do with water, ask for a one-time compliance report. And if it says on there amalgam separator or equivalent device, then it's good to use Captol. That's simple.
Can put some of those resources, Charles, I'm sorry for interrupting you. We can put some of those resources in the show notes. So a copy of the one-time report form. And I think that there is a link on the EPA website to go to states to see what the state rules and so forth are. So we'll put those in the resources in the show notes.
Yes.
And Charles, I want to make sure that our listeners have a chance to visit the Captol website. Dove Dental is actually the page that they'll go to find the Captol product. I saw that you have a free sample that people can ask for. And so just to actually have that in your hands and really use it and see what it's like. And then remember that even if you do have an amalgam separator, you're catching it at the chair side. And that is going to override those chairside traps, which I would argue with New York that many of those chairside traps with the little chunks of amalgam are going into the trash can anyway. So they're better bet. It's what is it? 0.3% off from the 99 that they want. It'd be better to go ahead and allow that because that's a better option, a better solution.
Exactly. We're working with them. And we're also working with the ADA. We're getting an ANSI certification too. We'll have it pretty soon. We've been working with the ADA on their equipment division because it's in the equipment part. So we're on that. So we have meetings every couple of months.
And everybody should have a copy of best management practices for amalgam in their office because I think people are surprised when I say that you can't rinse these amalgam traps at chairside and you can't throw the amalgam in the trash. And then they say, well, we'll just put it in the sharps container. And, so we'll make sure that we provide a copy of that. And we're thrilled to know that you are going to be moving forward, pushing the crusade forward. And we'll be following that as we go along. And we thank you so much for joining us today. And what we'd like to do is close our program by reminding our listeners that we bring clarity and simplicity to compliance by navigating regulatory compliance to keep you on course and bringing folks like Charles in to give us the information and help clarify that is just so helpful. You can submit your questions to support@thecompliancedivas.com. Look for these resources that we mentioned. in the show notes of your podcast. And if you wouldn't mind, leave us a little review while you're there. Thanks so much, everyone. And we're going to sign off for today. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you so much for having me.